Welcome to Inside the Founder Studio. We're a podcast dedicated to uncovering the grit that make founders, entrepreneurs, and innovative thinkers tick in one of the most crucial industries on the planet, supply chain. To learn more, you can check us out at insidethefounderstudio.com. But for now, let's hand it to our host, Ryan Schreiber.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Inside the Founder Studio. I'm Ryan Schreiber. Today I've got Spencer Tenney of the Tenney Group. Spencer is actually one of my favorite people in the industry. I don't know if I've ever told Spencer that, so this might be news to Spencer, but one of the warmest, friendliest, most sort of sharing people, and so I'm really glad to have him today here with me. And I think that's actually a pretty high compliment given kind of also some of the other folks that I've had on this show. So
indeed, I'm really humbled. Thank you.
Really excited to have you, Spencer. Why don't you introduce yourself quickly and maybe just introduce your company before we kind of get into your backstory and all that stuff?
Would love to. So Spencer Tenney, I'm the president and CEO of the Tenney Group. We're an industry specialized merger and acquisition advisory firm that's been dedicated to transportation and logistics since 1973. And so we have a team, it's all we do. And our passion and our whole business model is designed to primarily serve the interest of business owners that are in that 10 to 200 million in annual revenue, for which have very complex needs, some of which are financial, some of which are not financial when it comes to transitioning ownership of their business. And so it's a pocket that there's so much personal wealth tied up in there, and there's so much people that are doing great things for our economy. It's just a great privilege to be able to serve those folks at a high level.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons. What you guys do is one of the reasons I thought beyond just being like a great dude and somebody that I love. I always enjoy every single time I get to talk to you. It's a lot of fun. Kind of where you sit working with people who've built businesses, who are about to kind of like on the precipice of a really big life decision. Those are some interesting, I think, there's be some interesting insights in here for this podcast, particularly as I've explained to you and anybody who listens. It's more than just about success. It's also about fear of failure and imposter syndrome. Mm-hmm. I'd imagine that folks who are going through a sale process struggle with that from time to time, like even kind of getting into thinking about selling their business. I'd imagine there's a little bit of times where people are like, I'm excited about this, but I'm also like, well, what if it doesn't work? Like, what if it doesn't work out and I've got to tell my my employees that the sale failed, or I got to tell my spouse or my friends that this fell through and I wasn't good enough. So I think that'd be interesting. Actually, before we even get in your background, can I just ask that on the front end? Like, is that a real thing? Do people struggle with that on a regular basis?
I think it's much weightier than what people realize. I think people there's the fear of failure, but it's also the fear of success. What if I sell this business and the next person does things that I never even dreamed of doing? What does it say about me and my abilities and my identity? So there's a lot to wrestle with for founders who have built something, it's their life's work. So it's a very personal thing. And so navigating through that, that's why, we talk about financial. If it was just financial, it would be easy to help people through that process. But very rarely is it just that.
That's interesting to hear, because right, humans are human, which is, which I guess probably we lose sight of. And I kind of hadn't thought about the fear of success angle, which is interesting. I was able to get the business this far. If somebody else gets it further than I was ever able to, does that mean that I wasn't good enough? That's interesting. I kind of hadn't thought about that. Before we go too far down that rabbit hole, why don't we kind of like, let's talk about your story. Start maybe with what it was like growing up, what it was like being, I always like to say little whomever. So what was it like being little Spencer? Like, this is my infant son, Spencer. What was that like? Where are you from? How did you grow up? Where did you grow up? And maybe take us through, maybe up until kind of like college.
Sure. So I grew up in Arlington, Texas. That's right in between Dallas and Fort Worth. Some folks know it because that's the house that Jerry built with the Dallas Cowboys there now. It wasn't that way when I was growing up, but great family growing up, very close. There's a couple of key characteristics. Friday Night Lights football. We were a big football family. And then just hard work. We kind of had a reputation at my house that I think my dad just had an ego thing. He wanted to be known as the hardest working family. So like if on the weekends, people wouldn't come to our house. They would never spend the night because they knew my dad would give a list on Saturday morning. So it kind of affected our social agenda quite a bit. But that would be something that over time it really kind of gave a little bit of a swagger. My brother and I knew that we could probably outwork anybody. Just we kind of resented it as we were growing up. By the time we got to high school, it was definitely something that we took pride in. That we could work hard, and we did stuff as a family, and we just produced. Whether that was working in the yard or taking on a project, but that was a big thing that we always did together. And at the time, it did make sense. We kind of had to get dragged through it, but later on, it was just you see that had a lot to do with kind of wiring the way that I am today.
Did you play football?
I did. So
what position did you play?
I was a quarterback.
That was going to be my guess.
Yeah, so I played quarterback, and it was fun. I mean, playing at a large high school in Texas, that's about as good as it gets. I went and played 1 year college ball. And it was a little liberal arts college in Iowa, which was fun, but literally the experience was kind of a step down from what I was accustomed to.
I'd imagine
in high school in Texas, but it was a great thing. I mean, teamwork. I always talk about football being a great teacher of life. My brother's he's a high school football coach now. Cool. But football is like the one game where everyone has to do their job right every single time. And whereas in basketball, even baseball, you can take several plays off and no one would be the wiser. But in football, someone's going to notice. And I think that's kind of stayed with me as being a part of teams since then, that everybody plays a role and everybody needs to be a part of doing their job in order to win. Otherwise, you can never get as far as you need to go.
That's was it like Varsity Blues? You remember the movie Varsity Blues? How much was it like that? Did you ever have a moment with your dad where you're like, I don't want you'll laugh?
Well, it was funny. I mean, the specialization in high school sports now it's gotten way more intense than it was when I was there. But it was pretty. So I remember I was a sophomore and I knew I was going to be the starter in my junior season. But I also wanted to play baseball. So there was like this tension about like working out and getting ready for football. And so my head coach calls me in and he says, hey, what's the deal with this baseball stuff? I was like, well, I want to compete. I want to play baseball. He's like, really? I was like, sure, go have fun. So that next night, it was the last night of like the final tryout, and I had one at bat and I had a triple. And then the next day I got cut. And I was like, Like, yeah, right. I was like, okay, I guess my coach doesn't want me to play two sports. It's done. So
was it the same coach for both sports? No,
of
course not.
But the football coach typically in Texas is also the athletic administrator who kind of rules all. And so, but that's definitely kind of a little piece of that little just lens into the way that football works in Texas for sure. It was crazy.
That's the thing about kind of your friends not staying over. It's funny. This wasn't like a regular occurrence. One of my best friends when we were in high school, I remember we were like actually we weren't in high school. I remember we were 13 years old, and it was actually like right before the summer where I got my first job. But stayed over at my best friend's house, and his dad like came in the morning, and there were three of us passed out, and there was me, my two best friends, and whatever. And he's like, what are you guys doing still sleeping? Like, go get a job. We're like, we're 13 years old. Like, what are we? We literally can't get jobs. No one, like, it's illegal, right?
Right.
But I know kind of what you mean. And like that list of things to do. It's like you wake up and you, all right, cool. If you can't get a job, like here's 75 things to do around the house.
Yeah.
Go wash Miss Carol's car or whatever it might be. And certainly like hearing how that impacted you kind of later in your life. What when you got, other than getting cut from the baseball team, sort of like surreptitiously maybe, or like kind of there was something going on there. Do you have any of those? Was there ever kind of like a sporting example of like you thought you were gonna be the starter and somebody else got it? Like, was there any kind of major like setback or failing in those early days that kind of sticks with you today?
Honestly, not. I think part of my story, part of the main thing is of how little I failed in kind of those formative years, and that made life a lot of fun. But it was also kind of a mischaracterization of what life after that season would actually be like. And so, in some ways, I felt when I started coming across some real challenges, particularly in a professional life, the absence of some meaningful failures left me a little bit ill-equipped to deal with some of those things later on. And so, like I said, it was great, and it was kind of like an amazing thing, a season of life to deal with. But whereas some of my peers had some significant challenges and setbacks, I think those served them well, and I think my lessons came a little bit later.
So like kind of you got into a place where you reach an inflection point in your life and you're like, all right, cool. Well, I can make a choice here. I can either like have peaked in high school because everything was easy, or I can like figure out how to work through these challenges. Is that kind of like what you're saying?
I think part of it. I think that there's a certain amount of self-reliance, or just a worldview that's inaccurate. Like you just kind of overestimate your own abilities.
Mm-hmm.
I think that when you get put into a different context and you realize that on pure talent alone, like you're not all that.
Mm-hmm.
You got work to do. So I think that for me, I didn't handle that particularly well, but it was a necessary part of just my maturation as not just a professional, just as a human being.
Yeah,
And
like
I'm
an emotional maturity in a sense.
Yeah, and I'm grateful for it. I mean, my childhood was amazing. And do I wish I had more failures? Not necessarily. I mean, I just everything happens when it's supposed to happen. So
That makes perfect sense.
yeah.
For somebody, so you, especially, I'd imagine it's interesting because I've had several folks on here who played high school football and talk so much about how that formed them or helped form them. Kevin Nolan talked a lot about that and the impact that it had on him from a teamwork perspective. Same with Ted Alling. Like, Ted talked about playing. I think Kevin was like a linebacker and it fits Kevin's personality. Ted was an offensive lineman, and he talked about how that was sort of, the unsung hero of a team can be the guys who work in those trenches. You were the high school quarterback in Texas. Like, it doesn't probably get much more prolific and high profile than that, but you still talked about sort of the team dynamic and element of that without sort of having the counterfactual of being one of those grit guys. But obviously you had to be close. I'm sure you're still friends with folks that you played with, or maybe you're not still friends with them, and I'm sure you were friends with them for some time. Do you think that has impacted you differently than maybe because you were the quarterback, and to your point about sort of the false positive of how great you are in context of the team? Do you think that was something that you had a different experience than maybe other folks did, kind of carrying forward? Hey, there's a team. Well, there's a head of the snake, if you will. Like, sure, it's a snake and it's got to move as one sort of like body or unit. And I hate snakes, by the way, so this is creeping me out just giving this analogy. But there's still a head of the snake versus other guys are sometimes like it's one snake because we're all pulling in the same direction. Yeah. It's okay if you say no, by the way. I won't feel like an asshole.
No, I think for me it was where I got validation, and this even goes back earlier on. It was that there was natural leadership coming through both in sports and then in other things. And so people are like, hey, that was acknowledged and validated early on. So I think part of like, I never really saw like my my value being like there were lots of better football players than me. My contribution that was I was a leader. I could bring people together and go. And so I don't think that I ever really my identity was never really in my abilities as a player necessarily. It was more just that I had some giftings that I could help the team go where it needed to go. And so I think for me, I always kind of felt that there was a much broader application for those skills. I just didn't really know what they were.
Interesting. What was it? So, somebody who plays, I'm going to stay on the football thread for a minute, and I hope this doesn't bore people.
Sure.
But I did get Matt Vogrich and Molo to cry by talking about college basketball. So, I'll try this with you. So you play high school and you play high school football under the Friday night lights. It's a big thing. You go to play college football, but you said you only played for a year and then you took a step back from football. Did that feel like failure? Did that feel like a setback? Why did you step back? Or, maybe you go from having all of the success, being able to play in college. Most people can't do that. What was that experience like for you?
I think that the football in college for me, really, it just gave me an extension to buy time, really. I mean, I knew I was like, I'm not going to the NFL. I mean, I'm like that. I don't have that ability. And just going to a random school in Iowa, it was more just about an experience. I just wanted to use football as a way to go do something unique. No judgment. I ended up going back. I just didn't want to go to a standard state school and fall into that pattern like everyone else. I eventually went to UT Austin and graduated from there. But for whatever reason, I think I just needed an experience, and football provided me the bridge to go do that. And I think the main thing I can remember my uncle. It was painful. And when I told him I was going to transfer and not play ball, a lot of my family, I mean, that's what they did for 15 years, just watch me play ball, like my extended family. And it's like, you'll never play again. He was like so disappointed in that. And so I do think my only really regret is just from a maturity standpoint. Like, it wasn't really until my senior year that I actually could start put on weight. I was kind of like, it was very difficult for me to add.
Yeah, I never had that problem.
So
different types of weight, but yeah, I get what you mean.
So I think just the curiosity of just kind of walking away, I probably would have been. I think for me, I felt responsible to the coaches that had invested in me. I was like, there's no way I'm going to be here for a full 4 years, and they need to know from a recruiting standpoint, because I was going to be the starter for the next year. I just kind of felt, I don't know. I felt it was inconsiderate of their time and resources for me to not be forthcoming and to say, hey, this is where my expectations are. I'm not going to be here. So I want to let you guys know so y'all can do what you need to do from a recruiting standpoint. And so, but I do regret not, all the work they put in to do it and then not continue to kind of stay on that track, just physically and from a performance, because I still stay in shape. I still like to do athletic things. And so I think that's the regret. And I'm sure people feel that on a business standpoint. It's like, you want to see how good you can get just for that. And it's not even like for anybody else's knowledge. It's just for your own personal knowledge. How good can I actually be?
Right.
And so I think that's the one thing that walking away from the game, and still to this day, I still wonder about that. But that's probably the hardest thing.
I think you could have made the NFL. And as somebody who
my mom thought I was the next Flutie. So there you go.
You have a similar build to Flutie. I could see that. As somebody who went directly to a state school, I won't take it personally, the dig on going to a state school to come out of school. But one of the things I've always liked about you, Spencer, is that you're your positivity. Like, you exude positivity in a way that's kind of unlike many other folks. I think that's something you have in common with Ted Alling. You have this positivity about you. And as we talked about kind of like your early days, there was success in there, obviously, and like you didn't have a lot of challenges. But even as you kind of look back on it, you've talked about it in a very and I hope this siren isn't for you. It's cool. Just if they're coming for you, we might have to reschedule the recording of the rest of this podcast. But you've always had this kind of positivity, in my experiences with you, and your in describing this, you've kind of put everything in a very positive light. Have you always had that? Did you have to learn sort of to be positive? And in either context, like where does this kind of like Spencer Tenney positivity kind of come from? And also maybe I'm wrong. Are you actually like that in real life?
Yeah.
Or just in the times you interact with me?
No, I would say so. And I think a lot of that comes from my family. And probably one major life event. So I can remember when I was 8 years old, my dad had a very successful transportation company, and kind of like something out of a movie. He had a business partner, literally emptied all the bank accounts and left the country, bankrupted our family.
Oh,
And I mean, it was like, for my dad, I almost never saw him. He was working 24/7, much like our industry peers do all the time. So I didn't really have a relationship with him. And so two things came out of that were profoundly impactful on me. Number one, my dad used this. He looked at this as kind of a moment of grace on him. He was on a path that he basically was choosing business over family, and this was a chance to reset for him. And so, despite the damage that did to our family and the stress that did, almost immediately, and even the 35 plus years since then, he's looked at that event with gratitude, and that saved my family basically. And even at the same time, my dad was totally rocked. And anyone who's suffered a major business loss, I mean, just kind of like overwhelmed. What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And my mom stepped up, and and demonstrated extreme, unexpected strength for us. And so she just kind of gathered up my brother and I, was just like, "Hey, boys, it's going to be an adventure." And that's kind of been a theme for our whole life, for our family and legacy. It's from a gratitude and from an adventure. And so, as an entrepreneurial family, even since then, high highs, low lows, a gratitude, and with a perspective, this is like, what a privilege to be actually doing work that's meaningful, that matters, detached from the outcome, and it's a beautiful thing. For that, I'm for that perspective, eternally grateful.
It's interesting to hear you say at the end there, detached from the outcome. Can you explain what you mean by that?
I think what I observed growing up, there were times where our family had a lot of money, and there was times where we had no money. And then by definition of success, by building value in companies, of what my dad had done, the cost of which that placed on our family did not seem equitable to what he was getting in return for that. And so I think for me, as far as like, you want to go do work, you want to do some things and detach from the outcomes, because really, and this, I mean, there's a lot of folks that talk about this, but really it is the process. I mean, if you love what you do, if you're bringing value to people, the results kind of come, and it may not look like how you expect them to, but I just think that that's what life is. And if you're doing that, you're keeping in the moment, both relationally, and just your life. And so I to me, that's what I mean by that, as far as detaching from the outcome, is do your absolute best. And then, my dad, very strong man of faith, but I mean, he's kind of instilled in us this Colossians 3:23, which is, whatever you do, do it heartily, like your best, as to the Lord, not unto man, which is just like, hey, I'm not responsible to anybody but a higher authority. And so I'm just going to do my best. And then whatever man says about it, that's another deal. And so,
that kind of like, that's a good, that's an interesting frame. It's something that I've been struggling with kind of recently myself, in a manner of speaking. And what I think is kind of interesting in the way you described that is, it's a, what's interesting in the way that you described it is that it's both focused on right now and what you can control and the kind of the universe around you, but without becoming sort of transactional in that, in the implementation of that. I think like a lot of folks are like, I live in the moment and like I'm only focused on today, but then it becomes very short-sighted and transactional, and they're focused on sort of like short-term outcomes at the expense of the longer term. And what I'm hearing you say is like, focus on the inputs, focus on what you're doing and how you're doing it and why you're doing it, and trust and like make sure that they're the right things, and trust that the long-term outcomes will come from the right inputs, as opposed to trying to focus on tying the inputs to the outputs in a temporal fashion. Is that kind of a good conceptualization of what you're saying?
I mean, I think so. I think part of it is just on a deeper, and this, I'm not here to preach, but quite honestly, like, where does that freedom come from? It's like, well, if you believe that your value comes from a higher power, then you don't place as much currency on, did I grow my business? Did I do these things? I'm trying to do all these things, but my identity, that's not who I am. That's what I do. But who I am and like where my value comes is from a different place. And
I think that makes a ton of sense when I like starting kind of reframing, who do you ultimately answer? Like, even if it's not a higher power, even if you're not a religious person, like, who actually am I responsible to? Who do I actually have to answer to? It's not, for a lot of folks, for me, it's not my boss. It's not my parents. For me, in the stage of life that I am right now, it's my wife. Like, my parents will love me no matter what or whatever, as long as I'm not like a serial killer or something. And even then, they'd actually probably love me. They just wouldn't like what I did, but like, I'm not a bad human. So like, whatever the other stuff is, is what it is, so to me, it's like, I get up every day and kind of like, okay, well, I've got to answer. I don't want to look my wife in the eye and tell her I'm a bad person, or I did a bad thing, and so, and for some people that's faith. And so I think that makes a lot of sense. Who, kind of with that in mind, like, who, when you were growing up, and then I think from, we'll start to transition sort of more into career and the rest of your life. But when you were growing up, who did you look up to? I've heard you talk a lot about your dad. Did you look up to anybody? Did you look up to your dad? Did you look up to anybody else? Who did you want to say like, hey, little Spencer, good job?
Well, I would say there's two folks. My grandpa, he used to say this all the time, which is like, a job worth doing is worth doing right. Mm-hmm. And he would just pound that into my brother and I. And it's one of those things that you don't really appreciate that, how simple and effective that is. You always hear about like the greatest generation and how they did life. It's such a basic thing, but I mean, how true is that? Yeah. Like, if it's worth doing, why aren't you doing it better, or at the highest level that you possibly can? Why would you even do it if you weren't committed to do it at that level? Mm-hmm. And so I think that's something that's always stayed with me. Probably one of the greatest mentors that I had a youth football coach that coached me through 4th through 6th grade. And his influence on me was profound, because he the way that he coached me, he placed no limitations. He just said, we're going to run the high school offense. You're in 4th grade. We're going to run spread. We're going to run shotguns. You're going to call audibles at the line. And I believe that you can do it. Although no one, even 3 years older, was doing like what we were doing. But he just said, he just believed in me. And so that impacted me so much, because even now with my team, that's ingrained in me, as far as like, I won't be the one that holds you back. I will put you in a position to stretch, because from my own personal experience, when given the opportunity, I responded. and I did things that I didn't really think that I could do on my own, but because of the encouragement, because of the belief of someone else that I respected, you know, we set a lot of fourth grade youth football records. And so and I've never
You still got
forgotten
the
that.
trophy on your mantle.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, I say that all the time. I'll have young guys that are so smart, but there are fears. Like, am I capable of doing high level M&A work of what we're doing? And what my mission is, and this is kind of like just company vision. Where our vision starts is profoundly impacting the lives of my employees, and I think that I can do that through several things. But one of the main things is putting me in positions to stretch, putting them in a position to grow in a way that no one else would give them that opportunity. And if I do that, good things are going to happen. And that stems through that mentorship, going back to fourth grade, of somebody just saying, here are the keys to the truck, drive. And I can't tell you how.
Not literally, obviously.
Yeah. But just in terms of swagger, I mean, you can imagine of like how many decisions I approached after that, where I said, why can't I do that? Of course I can do that.
Yeah, that's interesting. There's a lot of leaders who struggle. Like, there's a lot of leaders who say to folks, hey, I want you to stretch. I want you to do more. What's the worst thing that happens? But to stand behind that and actually go like, all right, training wheels off. Like, I used to say this was a mistake I made earlier in my career. I would say to sales reps that I'd hire in my businesses, hey, don't worry about it. Take chances. What's the worst thing that happens? The worst thing that happens is you fuck everything up. Like, nobody dies. Who cares? but to your point, but I wouldn't walk that walk with them. I would, sort of, I wouldn't necessarily micromanage them, but I would sort of take trust but verify a little too far, instead of being like, hey, it's cool. Like, I want to support you. I'm not saying sink or swim. I'm saying I believe you can do this. So like, go ahead and run with it and let me know how you want to be supported, how I can be the best kind of support system for you. I think that's an interesting choice.
Yeah. And there's certainly been instances where, I've offered too much leash, and it's, you're like, whoa, we got to bring that back. And it's not like a negative thing, because I'm owning that. I gave you that. That's not you. That's me.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
And so like, I just got to bring it back in. You're okay. We just got to equip a little bit more, and then we'll get back out and we'll keep stretching.
Yeah, so, right. It's not the end of the world. It's no big deal. Like, we'll figure it out, and like, we'll figure it out together. And I'll look for the ways in which, as opposed to looking for blame, I'm going to blaming you. Hey, here are the ways in which you fucked up. Your point. It's like, hey, I gave you I didn't do these 3 things that I should have done. Let's adjust those things and let's try this thing again. Yeah. And I think that makes sense. So when you got into college, you went to UT, you studied something, ?
Yeah, I studied public communication. I kind of had aspirations. That was when that show, The West Wing, was really big. I kind of saw myself as like a behind the scenes speechwriter on the Hill. And so I went down that road for a while and worked at the Capitol, interned over there. And
oh, really? Was it anything like Aaron Sorkin made it seem in The West Wing?
Well, not at the Texas State Capitol. So it was definitely different issues were paramount in Texas.
Imagine. So
that were presented on that show. But that was a wonderful experience, just learning about the process. But I think, like everything on TV, it's so glamorized, and you get a little, like, this is much slower than what I thought it was. And
especially the way he
they make him look awesome in TV. It's like, this is not really what I thought it was.
A lot of banter, a lot of wit back and forth.
Oh,
for sure. So what was your first job? Not like either out of school or growing up. Like, when did you have your first job, and what was it?
Well, all kinds of odd jobs, but my first real job coming out of college. So I went.
Or like, did you wait if you waited tables or something? I don't know.
No, I did. I mean, you name it. Going back to 13. I started doing janitorial services for my dad's offices at 13 to buy my '79 Ford pickup truck, of which I still own.
Oh, nice.
And so kept it in the family. But from that to driving ranges to waiting tables, to a little bit of everything. But ultimately, I went and worked for my dad for a few years after college, and he paid me almost no money. And but what I got out of that experience was just a ridiculous amount of access to do a lot of different things.
What did the business do, and what did you do?
I mean, primarily I worked in marketing at that time. And so it was one of those things where, like, hey, I'm just gonna let you run the marketing department. What's the budget? There is no budget. You're just gonna have to freestyle. And so I think that just required a very scrappy creativity at a very early age of doing that. And as part of that, I was learning sales. I was getting a little bit more involved in sales, but ultimately, I got so frustrated with my dad because I was like, "Hey, I want to progress. I can't do that unless I learn how to sell, and I need you to teach me." And he's like, "Teach what?" I'm like, "I don't know how to do what I do. I just do it." And for me, that was not helpful. And I just knew, like, I can't go anywhere. We don't have any infrastructure to provide the type of training that's going to allow me to bring value to the company. And so, much like I advocate for a lot of family-owned companies, I went out and worked at a large company, and was in healthcare in a physician recruiting company. And that was a profound experience for me because, about 1,000 employees, you got very specific structures and strong mentors that help travel with, that we went and did calls with. You're working with CEOs of large hospital systems. And what was great about it was it provided a vision for me just in terms of the workflows that would ultimately come back a few years later, coming back to Tenney Group and bringing all of that experience, integrating it into how we did business. So that was a huge thing for my personal development and my growth from a training standpoint. And I say it all the time for family businesses. If you're not doing that, if you're not, like, by design sending some of your family members to go out and get different types of experience, like, it's a huge miss. Because you can only learn so much within an operation. And the typical, I mean, you're gonna share what you know and what you've experienced, but that's pretty limiting if you want to use your family members to go next level.
Especially, if it's all that they've ever known. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, there's not much to draw upon. I mean, no disrespect for my dad had just a lifetime of sales experience. He just couldn't teach it, and we couldn't, at least not cost effectively or efficiently to me. I mean, that's all we would be doing.
Some of the best doers and creators don't understand their process. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, we see this all the time in businesses, especially I think sales is probably the role where you see it the most, but just regardless of what the role is, the highest performing individual contributors rarely make the best managers. I mean, data just shows that, right? And so sales is a good example of that. You make your best salesperson a sales manager. That doesn't mean that they're just because they know how to, just because they are good at selling doesn't mean they actually know how to sell. Doesn't mean that they understand their process and can teach it to other folks. That's true usually across organizations. And because and obviously a lot of it comes from, just some natural abilities. But so, to your point earlier about how great could you ever be at something, everybody has a ceiling for any given thing. Like, I'm never going to be LeBron. I love to play basketball. I'm never going to be LeBron. I'm never going to be Magic. I'll never be MJ. I'll never be Kareem. I'll never be any of those guys. And not just because I'm not, not just because I'm only 6'3", like, that's their thing. That's the thing that they're the best at. I'll never be Derrick Rose. Derrick Rose is the same height as me, and I'll never be Derrick Rose. But, but I still, like, my ceiling is probably higher than I ever reached when it came to hoops. My ceiling for lots of things. And so, kind of that experience of being curious and finding your ceiling is an interesting one. Because it sounds like you've done that a couple of different times. You've kind of been so like, hey, how far can I push this? How far can I go? Do you think that comes from that experience of kind of having the keys in fourth grade and like drive the truck, don't crash it because the cops will come, even if it's Friday night lights, or do you think it comes from somewhere else?
No, I mean, I'm not sure where it comes from. I think that there's certainly I've just kind of always had a desire to kind of push limits, and that comes out in different ways. But yeah, I think there's just a kind of a natural desire to compete. Part of that's from sports. You want to compete, you want to be the best. But I think on an individual level, I just want to know that I'm growing. I think that's the main deal. I think that talk about fear, you talk about whatever. I think a fear it's not even failure. It's as much as stagnation.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be stagnant in what I'm doing.
Is that kind of like today your definition of failure? Would that is just like is stagnation? I mean, given kind of how you described the ebbs and flows growing up of your dad's businesses, like you've seen boom and bust. So, it kind of seems like your conception of failure might be a little bit different, because the business failing isn't failure in and of itself, because there's a life after that, it sounds like, right? So how would you define failure today?
No, I think that, it's a good question. I mean, I think there's several. I mean, there's just obviously if you fail, you fail. I mean, you don't have to like dress it up, like you screw something up or you don't get a deal done or whatever.
But that's not failure with a capital F, right? Like, I mean, that's what people are worried about. People are worried about failure with a capital F. Right. And the problem, sometimes they think failure with a lowercase f by default means failure with a capital F. And I think what I'm noticing from you is that your story is one where like failure was a thing that just kind of happened. You threw interceptions, right? Like you took sacks you shouldn't have taken. Your dad's business partner ran off. By the way, did they ever catch the guy or like did that get resolved?
No.
Oh, wow. Crazy. Mm-hmm. So, like the dad's businesses failed. Sometimes it was things he did. Sometimes it was crazy shit that you never could have seen. So you've seen a lot of failures with a lowercase f, but like your dad still was a very successful man. He had, in many facets, not just in business, in his life, right, in family development, et cetera. Right. So you have an understanding that lowercase f failure doesn't mean capital F failure, right? So like not doing the business deal is lowercase f failure, but that doesn't mean that it's capital F failure. So for you, do you understand, kind of see what I'm going for?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think it's never been transactional for me. Mm-hmm. And otherwise, I think that we would probably do like investment banking. We would target different types of deals. I mean, mm-hmm. I think that, because like I said, if it was just transactional, then we would cut everything off that was below 200 million in annual revenue. And, people that are hearing that, they're saying it's not easy. It's like, well, it's, in some ways it is. If you're just purely transactional. And, mm-hmm. and so like for me, success, or when we're talking about failure, as I see it, I think part of it is like shrinking. It's one thing to like fail, but to shrink, to realize or even try to realize your full potential. I think that's kind of failing for me. When I'm working with nonprofits, that's a big deal. Like, hey, like y'all haven't like together, like we haven't even touched or even like the surface of what our potential is. Like we have to think bigger. We have to innovate, and least of all, we can't shrink. And so I think that's kind of my default mentality is like be growing, be pushing limits, and just activate whatever that is. I mean, like do something. And because if you're not doing anything, I just don't have a high tolerance for that. That's where I'm going to get upset with myself, my team, anybody else.
One of my favorite phrases is, it doesn't matter if it's okay to do the wrong thing, just do something. Like if you know that it's wrong, like if hey, this is not going to work, or this is wrong or whatever, don't do it. But otherwise, like don't do something, take
Right.
action, be a participant, so I love that.
Yeah.
You said growing up was relatively easy. We're getting into your career now, obviously. Like you said, growing up was easy, and you kind of your first major challenges came in your career. So like what's maybe the first major challenge that you recall from your career that you kind of had to step back and say, okay, well, I could have now I could have peaked in high school, or I could figure out how to deal with these things.
I think what was different about I had a major misunderstanding, really probably the first 10 years of my professional life. Whereas in sports, I mean, nobody works for anybody. Everybody's there together on their own accord. And so mobilizing and leading, it's just something, it's about influence. You have to influence them to do something. And so somewhere along the way, I confused like influence with authority. Like they should just be doing this. Like this, they should be lucky to be here, like to have a job, to be in. And I think that was a period of time where, for whatever reason, I became ineffective as a leader, primarily because I misunderstood how to manage relationships and how to drive influence within a team outside of like a sports environment, basically, or maybe forgot how to do it. And so, the result of that was a lot of relationships became transactional when they shouldn't have been. And so I think ultimately I got humbled a lot because like, why is this not working? Why is this not working? Why don't people work as hard as I do? Dun, 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 dun. And so really ultimately, after a series of just, working with people and not achieving the results, not having the chemistry within relationships within a team, that's just something just kind of had to walk away. And it was kind of more of a heart transformation to say, when you're talking about success, it's like, hey, I want to redefine how I'm looking at success. I need to redefine the way that I look at my employees. It's like my company success has to be driven by their success. Like I've got it backwards. I have to kind of re-engineer how I think about this. And so basically, probably going back to, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, a process began to change. And it's funny, I've told people this, that really like I developed some really bad habits. And so I kind of started taking like the George Costanza, opposite George approach,
Yeah.
was like whatever my natural instinct
You got
was.
a job with the New York Yankees. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was like, whatever my natural instinct is, whatever I'm feeling, I'm doing the exact opposite of that right now. And it was funny. It literally started working. And really what needed to happen and what ultimately happened, it was more of a heart transformation for me. It was it was more of a heart problem and just the way that I was caring for the folks around me. And I get that. I mean, that's a God thing, God working on me and humbling me and what needed to happen. And so once some of those changes took place, like I said, that's not like an overnight deal. I think that's a hard learning process of underperforming, not necessarily failing as much as just like, hey, this is way too much energy for this amount of output, way too much energy. Yeah. Like, what is happening? And so when I think in God's loving kindness provided me a little bit of truth and clarity there, things really started to change for Tenney Group and just for me and how I related to people.
That's interesting. The genesis of this podcast, and I was sharing this with you right before we kind of started recording, the genesis of this podcast came from me going through a process for myself of trying to understand certain things. And it's actually exactly what you just described. Like influence versus authority versus leadership. I'm a very effective leader if I don't have if you didn't report to me, right? Because I invested in, because I had all I had was influence or relationship, right? And I care very deeply about people, and whether they reported to me or not, but I didn't tell them what to do. I treated them very differently. And so I went through this process of doing what I do on this podcast, which was just, I talked to fucking everybody about all kinds of different things. and just tried to learn about their lives and how they went through things. And when I would hit on something like exactly this point, I would ask them, well, what was your process for trying to figure that out? So what was, so you identified this problem. It sounds like you spent time sort of like soul searching and like the and leaning back on your faith. Was there a process for yourself to kind of figure that out and change beyond maybe just, even if it's just taking what I heard you definitely say was, I took a step back and I would say, before I would react, I would give myself some emotional distance from a thing. And I'd say, all right, wait a minute. Instead of just continuing to kind of move through my life, wait, I got to take a step back and look at the thing I'm considering. That's one part of the process. Was that all of it? Or was there more in there that you kind of said, okay, here's how I'm going to attack. Maybe you didn't do it consciously at the time, but looking back on it, hey, here's how I attacked that to really change that, identify it, change it, implement it in my life.
No, I mean, that's a good question. And I'm in a mastermind group, and I actually kind of walk our group through this fairly recently. And what this looked like for me, there's a progression here. And so for me, what I understood was that I needed to put the interest of others first. And so what I started doing, in the same way that you would schedule a sales call or some type of revenue producing activity, I just said, I'm going to start bringing value, and I'm just going to start scheduling. This is what I'm going to do, detach from the outcome. And I'm just going to schedule that in part of how I'm going to do business and how I'm going to do life. And I would quantify, like, these are the things I'm going to do this. And it was a part of kind of developing a muscle within me that needed exercise. And so what ended up happening when I started doing this activity, what ended up happening was I started developing at first it wasn't natural. Then over time, it started becoming habit forming. It was almost like a reflex, like of what was going on. So you start having like behavior modification. And then when I just could easily identify the needs around me and have a desire to do that, what ended up started happening was, you have a habit forming. And then when the habit started forming, what really started happening was a heart transformation. So like that didn't happen overnight, but there was a system in terms of how it happened, which was, I'm going to do these things because I feel like I should be doing these things. And then after a while, I didn't even have to try. It was like a reflex. And then after that, my motivation for doing them was totally different. Totally different.
So, it's what we talked about earlier. It's like you focus on the inputs and you trusted that the outputs long term would be what you were looking for.
Yeah. And so, it started out like, hey, it's like, maybe I think this will probably develop good business. It's probably going to help me be a better leader. And then ultimately what you have is, a changed heart and a totally different reason for why you do that. And so I think to me, that was transformative. It's pretty basic in terms of love your neighbor. I mean, it's pretty basic. I mean, in terms of just a model.
There's like 10 lists. There's a list of 10 of those things, I think.
Yeah. And so like, it's pretty basic. But I'm so grateful for having gone through that process and what has been revealed to me through that, because I told somebody the other day, I was like, especially in my business where it's like really long sales cycles, like how wonderful it is to kind of fill up the buckets in between relationally, you and I mixing it up and help one another or whatever it is. I mean, how much richer does that make life in the meanwhile?
Totally.
And so to me, that was the process. I mean, it sounds kind of basic, but it really was by design. And I didn't really know how I would evolve, but it certainly has happened.
An interesting part of your story is how you came to to lead Tenney Group and take over Tenney Group. Can you kind of like maybe share with us what that looked like? I mean, you worked at Tenney. You worked at the Tenney Group with your dad. You left to kind of get this sales experience. You came back. You brought that to bear. And then how did you come to be in the role you are in today?
So I have been working, and my dad and I were doing deals kind of on our own with our separate teams. And back in 2010, he provided me a partnership track. which I would earn equity in the business based on performance. And which took place, which was fine. And then, but during that process, I think what happened was, I mean, he was looking at this as part of kind of insurance for his retirement, basically, and to lock me in. I mean, so I didn't go off and do whatever. But ultimately, I kind of fell in love. I mean, that was the deal, was like being able to help business owners at that level. To me, it is the ultimate. It's the ultimate challenge from a sales standpoint, if that's what you're into. But on the human level, to help somebody realize the fruits of their life's work. I mean, maybe I'm biased, but I feel like in terms of meaningful work, like I can imagine doing anything that I felt had more meaning than that. So that was kind of a drug. When I started doing deals, I was like, I'm in. Help these people like that. And knowing that we bring something unique to the table, like I'm in. But what was different when we were working together and we were partners, and this is true of all our clients, family businesses, and even just partners, just like very different visions for the future. You know, my dad is just like, loves doing it, but like, hey, as far as aiming it up and scaling and doing all kinds of things that I wanted to do, I don't really think that's, well, I know that like he liked the idea of it. It's like, but he didn't want to be on the hook to go execute those things to do. So back to the stagnation thing, for a couple of years, we kind of were stagnating because we were not investing and growing and keeping the pedal down to go realize our full potential. And that was creating some problems for my dad and I. And my dad and I have a really, really great relationship. And one thing that's kind of funny is that people around us know, like, he's like, I've always been harder on my dad than he is on me. And that sounds like crazy, but like, that's just like the nature of how I don't mean like disrespectful, just like, hey, like, it's never been like where my dad's like, hey, this is the way it is, son. Like, he's very humble and I don't know. It's I'm very blessed to have my dad, for sure. But from a business standpoint, we really operated kind of as equals. And so I think that what needed to happen was that we needed a way for the business to realize the full potential. And in order to do that, we had to get our goals aligned. And the only way to do that was for me to buy him out. And so I think for a lot of folks, that are in family business, the resistance from the founder is like, well, I'm just going to get pushed out of here. And, you know, yesterday's news, while this thing goes on, it was very open in terms of like, I was like, that was not my desire at all. It's like, I have a very specific vision. And what I want to do for you is like, I want to put you in a position to only do the things that you want to do, and then share your 50 years of knowledge to help me go do all the things that I want to do without making all the mistakes. And so, and, you know, think about being able to leverage your experience across 5 times the business size of like what that will mean from an impact. That's what I want. And so for us, it was, you know, it was a pretty amazing thing. And we continue to work together. He works how and when he wants to work, but he's a deal guy. I mean, you'll never get him away from deals.
Sure.
But what's also kind of cool about the story, probably 4 months after I bought him out, he was in a significant motorcycle accident, and which, had we not done what we were going to do, would have been pretty disruptive. I mean, because you know, my deal was this: I don't even care if like I have all the shares. I said, I just want control. Had we not done that, and he was still the controlling partner when he was incapacitated, it would have been very damaging. Most damaging probably to our employees, because I would have probably had to make some pretty severe decisions about.
Is he okay now?
Oh, he's fine. He's fine. Yeah, I mean, he was out
That's
for about.
That's the important thing.
Yeah. No, I mean, he was out for about 6 months, and I mean, and literally, you know, he'll tell you about how grateful he is to be living, and you know what a great life. But it's been amazing. I mean, I've had the benefit of working with my dad 20 plus years and still working. And when we're talking to families, I always tell them like, hey, I'm the biggest advocate of the internal family transfer that you're going to see. Like, if there's a way to do it, I want to help you do that, irrespective of if Tenney Group's involved and can somehow be compensated for that, because it's a beautiful thing. But the reality is, for a lot of folks, it's not in the cards. And so I think that what we try to do out there is to share what we've experienced, what we've done right, what we've done wrong. But for the most part, the same things that we advocate for folks out there, like we did the same process about how to go execute and ensure that, doing what's best for the business, doing what's best for the people that work there, but also doing what's best for our family.
Yeah, you can speak very authentically to that.
Yeah.
What was that a scary sort of like process or conversation to have? I mean, all of a sudden you're going to take on this thing that that your family has built, that you built alongside your dad. Suddenly now you're the guy. Like, what would that have meant? Like to you, one of the things we talked about early on is, well, like the fear of success and the fear of failure in that. Like, what if, I'm sure your dad might have dealt with fear of success, but like, did you say, okay, well, if this fails, suddenly like I've let my dad down in addition to like letting down my business partner? Did you deal with kind of the like, hey, he's been doing this for 50 years and like, who am I to say I know how to do it better, imposter syndrome type stuff? Or did that not kind of enter into the calculus? Were you so sure you kind of had the plan?
I think that the most intimidating thing for me, I felt from a technical standpoint that I could go execute and do the things that I wanted to do. But the one thing that this is like a legacy thing with my dad. My dad has the ability, both with the people that he works with, but also our clients, to just have this extreme trust. And it's kind of like it's like a superpower, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And where we get to the point where they're just like, it's a very heated moment within a deal, and decisions everything's on the wire, and he's looking at them and just saying, hey, I'm telling you, this is the way it's got to be. You're just gonna have to trust me on this one. And they say I'm in. And so I think that where my fear was is, am I going to be able to garner that same trust when in the moments where that's what's required? Being younger, being less experienced than my dad. So I think that those are kind of some of the fears, that I had, because I'd seen him operate at such a high level. And though we have different strengths, but I think that one in particular was like, I've always kind of marveled at, like, that's a really, really rare gift. And if I can't do that, how else am I going to find a way to get it done? And
sure.
So, but I think my dad is, he's been a great encourager. I think that's another one of his gifts. And so I think that he's encouraged, like, you don't have to do everything the same way. You can still get excellence a lot of different ways. It doesn't have to be, we're just different people. Have you seen him with his cowboy hat? It's just different. And like, and I love that about him, but I think definitely, and still, like, you want to honor him. You want to honor the people that have done business with us. You want to honor our employees and make sure stuff continues to get done at a high level. So
everybody has a superpower. I talk about that a lot, actually. And when I interview folks, I ask them, I'm like, what's your superpower? And certainly, like, I like to tell people I will tell people in the moment, like, that's my superpower. Apparently I have like a bunch of them because I'll say it a lot. What's your superpower? I think everybody has one. What's yours?
That's interesting. I think part of maybe a gift is I'm a pretty good activator when if things need to get done, kind of mobilizing groups around action.
Sure.
I think that's something. I think my wife would say something like, you have a very unique ability to kind of disregard what everybody else is thinking about you at that moment and just kind of doing your thing.
That sounds like a backhanded compliment, but yeah okay.
Yeah, I think that's what she would say. It's kind of like this ignorance is bliss type thing, like, whatever. Sure. Okay. But honestly, I whether it's a superpower or not, I do feel like I'm grateful for that, because I understand how some people have such anxiety worrying about what other people think. And I think that a lot about how I do life is that for whatever reason, that's never been a huge part about how I do life. I don't really think a ton and don't sweat a ton about what other people think about it.
Yeah. I once asked my wife why she fell in love with me, like above everything else. Cats, tacos are things that we have in common. Love of cats, love of tacos. That's why we moved to Texas. But her answer, which was what I expected her to say, but her answer was that I am who I am and I don't really care what people think about it. Like,
Yeah.
This is me. This is what you
Yeah.
get. There's good to it. There's bad to it. I know that just as well as you do, but I don't fucking care if you don't like it. So I think that's along the lines, very similar sort of. I want people to like me. I'm not like actively trying to make people dislike me.
That's what I'm saying. Is like I hope they do, but it just doesn't occur to me to stay up at night thinking about it.
Well, to you, that's kind of the different, like you were talking about earlier. I mean, it's the same concept of like focus on your inputs, focus on what you're doing, what you can control, what folks like. So like, are you kind, right? Like, are you like, do you follow up with people? Like the things that you can control that you think make you a good friend, partner, teammate, board member, whatever it might be. And then if they don't like the way you're going about it, like, sorry. I mean, when I got out of school, people were always like, shave your beard. I mean, even to this day, it's like, shave your beard, Ryan, get rid of your beard. Nobody's going to take you seriously professionally if you don't shave your beard. And my reaction was always, if somebody doesn't want to do business with me because of my beard or because of my person, I don't want to do business with that person anyway. Right. That's my choice. Like, it doesn't change who I am as a human being. But so I think that's definitely interesting. One kind of like penultimate question, second to last question. Give me an example of a time when maybe like in this journey, you were just plain lucky. Like you made a decision, it could have sunk the ship, or maybe even you didn't make a decision, but something happened, some outside forces, maybe like when you're, not to this extreme, but when the guy steals the money from your dad and takes off. Was there situations like that in your journey where you were just plain lucky and you're like, oh man, that worked out?
No, I would say yes, several times. But one thing I did about 4 years ago, I started this networking group called Tuesdays with Tenney Group in downtown Franklin. And it was just kind of an experiment to provide a different format for networking, smaller groups. We would leverage, share data after the fact to 200 plus folks. And I'd serve up lunch and had really no expectations from it. And the lucky part about it is it has directly led to some major hires on our team from a talent standpoint, just from this networking that would have never otherwise. So it's like a total walk on faith. It's not even for transportation. It's like for local Franklin. And but as a byproduct of that, just connected to some of the best talent in M&A period. That has literally have transformed the trajectory of our firm. And so like I definitely consider that lucky, because I'd had no expectations for that. It just kind of happened. But as you know, like you only go as far as your people can take you. And I feel that I lucked out and got some of the very, very best doing M&A work in this business.
It's good. I mean, it's you following your own advice of like, do something, right? I mean, like, see what happens. So last question, final question. Well, I guess actually there will be one more because I'll be like, how can people, if people want to learn more? But so this is like the last real question. You talk to a lot of companies in freight transportation, logistics. Where do you, kind of like from where you sit, where do you think the industry is going? What are some of the trends that you're really interested in seeing, and what should people kind of be keeping an eye on from your perspective?
Well, I mean, I think for the most part, at least on the truckload side, very low margin industry. So I think that as more challenges come up, even with more technology, all those things are driving more consolidation because of the challenges. You gotta have scale to offset just the growing expenses within the industry, and just all of the wonderful technology you and I have talked about. Like, you also need scale to fully capitalize on a great deal of that to the full extent. Not have to, but to fully capitalize, you need scale. So I think there are going to be trends towards consolidation. I'm interested in artificial intelligence and the role that it's playing, not only just how we do business, and also how that's going to affect the way that companies are valued. I mean, is that going to be a significant driver in the future about the ways, how one investor looks at one business versus the other? If the performance is the same, yet this is, highly, AI integrated into what they're doing, like how are they going to be viewed from a valuation standpoint? I think that's some things that we're gonna see, and I'm excited to kind of be in the middle of that as it's unfolding. But I think largely that you're going to see a lot of rapid transactions take place over the next 8 to 12 months. Some of that's tax driven, some of that's just anticipating increase in interest expenses. But all in all, I think the main trend is what we're already seeing is just the rise of more innovation, younger, visionary talent that are going to bring things to the industry that we've never even thought about. And I think that's the main thing that I think.
I was waiting for you to say like you, Ryan, but no, it's cool. Fine. I appreciate that.
I said young talent. I mean, naturally, I was talking about you.
Yeah, well, you were looking at me when you said it. So, but
right.
Like anybody who's listening to the podcast doesn't actually listening to the audio doesn't know that. No, I'm just joking, but I agree with you for sure. Thanks for jumping on with me, chopping it up. If people want to learn more about Tenney Group, how can they get in touch with you? How can they learn more about what you guys do?
Yeah, I mean, the best way is just get to know us at our website, thetennygroup.com. All kinds of videos and content to kind of understand how and why we do business. But I tell people all the time, we kind of see ourselves as kind of a clearinghouse. The vast majority of people that start a conversation with us, maybe they had a bad day, I want to sell, and then they don't sell for another 15 years. But I would encourage anybody that, like, whatever excuse that you need or that you have to have a conversation with us, what that leads to is us being able to loop in a really robust network of industry subject matter experts for whatever's going on in your life. So that's kind of a unique value add that we bring to the industry. However we start a conversation, number one, you'll get some value, get some insights, but you'll also get looped into our network of folks that you can help you no matter where you're at in your company's life cycle. So just start a conversation. You never know what might happen.
Sure. Check you out on LinkedIn, check you out on your website. That's pretty much the answer that most people give. Although one guy said, call me on my cell phone. And I was like, you want anyone who listens to this podcast to call you on your cell phone? All right, cool. Well, thanks, Spencer. I appreciate you sharing the time with me. Thanks everybody for listening. Remember to rate, subscribe, do whatever that stuff is that I'm supposed to say. And, until next time.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Inside the Founder Studio. A couple quick things before you go. We're proudly hosted on the Logistics of Logistics Network. To hear more content from the industry's top leaders in supply chain and logistics, check out thelogisticsoflogistics.com. And until next time, onward and upward.